This will be a slightly longer video, but it'll be helpful. So breaking the front end, there is all of the front parts that have been folded. There's a front piece that has glass already put into it. That's been put in, and this time I used super glue just to make sure. This is the lamest part. It's a seat. It looks okay once it's done, but it's just a piece of paper folded. There's a rear bulkhead with some tabs that are going to go towards the back on a turtle deck, and with some side pieces to hold things together when we get there. Here is the forward floor. It's wooden. It looks pretty good. The big hole is for the yoke, and the little slots are going to be for rudder pedals. And then that little tiny thing in the middle actually goes underneath where that square hole is, and has a hole in the center of it. That is where you're going to stick your control yoke right down the middle there, which is supposed to be a piece of plastic, but I'm going to use stretched sprue. Those dotted lines show where the seat goes on top and then where the floor attaches. So the seat has a little piece of folded paper on the top and back, and you just put a little glue on it and then just squish it and line it right up to the little dotted lines. Again, so far this kit, if you line everything up the way you're supposed to, it's worked fine. My only problems have been the balsa I'm using is marginally too thick, and so I'm kind of running into a couple of issues here that I think I can fix. But in general, the actual parts are just fitting gloriously. So put that on. Any excess that comes out will dry clear, and you can also kind of pull some off with a Q-tip or an old brush or whatever. Put a little glue onto the edge of the floor. And this all seems kind of rinky-dink and sort of kind of weak, including the front end where you fold everything up and put it together. But I can tell you, once you actually get it together, it's all very solid. To me, these formers should have been made out of, with wood or cardboard. They're just the paper, but, based on how they tell you to put it together, it actually turns out just great. So I guess follow their lead. Here, just making sure that is straight. Has to be straight, otherwise if it's not, you're in trouble, because it has to, it's going to go to the front end and be just right. So I'm just kind of taking the time to make sure that it's actually lined up on the dotted lines. And then once that's done, then you're set. Pushing down the back tabs just to make sure it's stuck. Then I started putting the side together. You can see that's going to fit down on that front end that wraps around with the window. You can see there's two parts to it there. That's going to fit underneath, and I started with an edge here, putting it right on this edge. You can see where it's right underneath those controls, which makes sense. That's for the pilot, I guess. It's probably maybe throttles or something. Not sure. But I just do the same thing. Line those up so that they're just perfectly aligned with the dotted line. And then the rounded piece up there, of course, has to fit just underneath the windowsill, underneath the clear part. So you're okay if that actually, matches up. Making sure it's all good along the side there, and letting things dry, and then just slowly putting glue on and wrapping it around. I'd advise you don't do it all at once. Just sort of take your time. Do a little bit at a time, and you'll be much happier in the end. I probably should have actually folded this, rolled it over some a handle, a brush handle, so that it already had a curve in it, and I neglected to do that. Partially because it's got the plastic clear glass in there, so it makes it harder to do that. But this glue works great. You roll it around, hold it in place, and you just slowly go all the way around. You finally get this last little bit glued in place, and then you end up with your front area all basically put together. And you just kind of roll it over. This is the hardest part. It wasn't hard, but you had to make sure it was lined up again. And you take some of your cues from where that turtle deck connections are going to go and even them up with the other side. But it is kind of hard to make sure, especially on camera, to make sure the thing is actually where it's supposed to be. And once you got it, you did a little squeeze in between. One thing I'm not showing that I did is there's a little rod that goes underneath the seat that connects on either side. And I actually ended up putting that in afterwards, and that holds the seat and gets everything, make sure that the whole thing kind of doesn't collapse in. I used a piece of pulled sprue for that. Now I'm putting on the control yoke connector that's again underneath, and I'm just sort of squeezing that and making sure it's kind of square, and made sure the hole was in the center of the square hole so that it'll look good when it's in there. And I'm just making sure it's nice and solid. And then I think I put in just a little couple shots of super glue on it because it has to be strong. Yeah, I just put a little bit on there on a couple of the tabs, just to make sure it works. Neil on Neil's paper models, he does that a lot too. You start with a little bit of glue and then hit it with a little super glue. It actually is a pretty good idea, because the super glue is, it's your friend as long as you have everything fit the way it's supposed to fit. It's really nice, and it gets things together quickly, and it's nice and strong, and especially if it's critical and it's going to move around a lot, it's nice to get it sort of cinched up. So there's the basic interior together. Now that is a pulled sprue yoke. This is a piece of fuse wire that I use as my actual steering column, I guess. I used 1mm fuse wire, rolled it around a Sharpie marker, and that was almost perfect diameter. And I put that together, glued that together. So now I've got a three-dimensional piece, and that is the spoke that goes in the middle. That's the paper. And then there's a little piece that goes on there. These, to connect the yoke part, those are rudder pedals. And those are going to go in that little slot, in the little slots underneath on the floor there. And you'll see how those go in just a second. But first thing I did was take that middle section, the spider section there, which is two pieces of paper, by the way, glued together, two layers, and then edge colored, just like normal. And I'm just kind of fitting it in there, fits perfectly. And then I'm going to put a little bit of super glue, in this case, on the four little bits, the four little places where it touches, and then hit it with a little zip kicker and lock it in place. And then you have your basis for that. The kit has just two pieces of paper that you sandwich, and that's fine, but it's flat. And this is, at least, it's round. I think it looks kind of cool to have it actually round. So fuse wire was what I used. So that looks okay. Next thing is to take this little piece, which is a little rectangular piece, and I rolled it with my quilling tool. And here I have it attached, and I'm just going to put a little glue on it so that I can roll it around with the quilling tool and get a pretty tight, little tight curl into it. Let that dry for a second, and that's going to go on the back of the yoke, of the steering wheel, I mean, so that you can actually attach my pulled plastic yoke to that, so it makes the handle sort of stand, the steering wheel sort of stand proud of that connection. So I super glued that into the center. Looks really good, dries quick, and there's the basic steering wheel. And then I put the actual yoke part that's going to move ultimately in there. Put a little super glue on it, and then hit it with a zip kicker, and that's together. Next thing I did was to paint it. So I painted the vertical sprue part sort of a dark metallic gray, and that's just painting that so that it doesn't look like a piece of gray pulled plastic. And again, this piece is made to be a piece of paper that you roll, and so I took my dimensions from that. But when I roll tubes, they just look like really poorly rolled cigars, and they're real thick. I have not learned how to do that yet as a good paper modeler. Then I painted my handles, and they're supposed to be wooden, I believe. So I painted it sort of a light brownish color all the way around and on both sides and inside. Just carefully do that. Helps to have little tweezers and things and jaws of death to hold things while you're painting. Just makes it a little bit easier. Or you're just patient and you let things dry, which is probably the best thing to do. While that was drying, I put the little rudder pedals in. You can see they go in that slot. And I made them, based on the directions, they should be vertical. The underneath part protrudes through the bottom of the floor. I did that, and that makes the pedal sort of look towards the guy, the pilot put his feet down. and there they are protruding out the bottom. So once they're protruding out the bottom, you can kind of tinker with them to make them be in the right position. And it just eyeballed it to me what looked good. It doesn't have to be perfect. No one's going to see this part anyway. Lock them in with a little bit of super glue just to make sure that they're on and in, because you do want to make sure that they stay there, because they will look cool, because you can see them from the front. That glass is wide open, so you can see everything through there. So it pays to do a good job. Then that was the wooden color was dry. So what I did was to take a little bit of my Tamiya clear orange and put it over the brown, and that does give a pretty pleasing look of wood to it, like varnished wood. I like it. Some people think, I guess, it's a little bit too stark. I think it looks pretty good, especially in a cockpit like that. You need something kind of bright so you can actually draws your eye to it. I think it looks great. Now I decided to take these little chains, little teeny weeny itty bitty chains that I found for some, I used them on my HMS Hood model years ago, but there's a bunch of different chain sizes, and I'm using that for my little control that's going to go around the little control column and down into the floor. I don't know if it was a real chain or not. It might have just been cables. I mean, they have little holes you're supposed to put cables on, but I thought I'm going to put a chain on there just because. So I put a little bit of super glue on there, and I dropped the chain, draped it over the top so that it basically connects to that little black portion, and then they just dangle down, and just make sure that they look good, that they're going to go on either side. I'm just making sure this part, that the little chain is glued nice. The chains glue fine. They're really fine and tiny. They look really good. And you can see that what I do then is I cut them to the same length approximately as the actual control yoke there. I just kind of stretch them out, and I want to cut them to be just about that size, because they're going to fit on either side of that piece down into that square hole, and be hidden down there. So now I've taken my control yoke and I've put some super glue on it and I've glued it. I'm just making sure it's straight in the hole. My control surfaces aren't going to droop or anything, so I'm just leaving it vertical. And there it is, protruding out the bottom. Again, probably don't need to, but give it a little shot of super glue and zip kicker just to hold it in place, just to make dang sure it stays there. You don't want your control yoke to fall, especially when you're trying to fly across the Atlantic. Then I took some white glue and a very thin bamboo skewer and put little pools of the white glue, the tacky glue, down on either side. I'm just kind of stuffing them down in there. So you can't see it too well, but there's little bits of now white glue on either side. Then I take my tweezers and I basically push the chains down into those little holes. And what they do, they don't have to be perfect, but they do end up drying on either side. I make sure that they're not twisted or anything, but they dry on either side of the main control yoke. And in the end, they look like they just disappear into the floor. And I suspect they would attach to the aileron cables and give you aileron control. So I like the way it looks personally. I don't know if it's accurate, but I think it looks kind of cool. And the cockpit basically is done there. It's kind of sparse. The real airplane must have had more stuff. We're going to put an instrument panel in there next. And then here I'm testing it to make sure it all fits. It looks Mickey Mouse, but then when you put it all together and you make sure everything's lined up and the little tongues fit where they're supposed to, it fits like a dream. I'm just testing to make sure that it will line up where it's supposed to. And then where the green goes up to those tabs right there. And if I do that, and I put that on either side, after test fitting this a bunch of times, it's going to work really well. And then you roll the bottom up against it, and then the front piece there where the glass is has a separate little piece that's going to roll around, but that's going to fold down and glue. And all that together, it's just paper, no formers, no nothing, no strengtheners. But lo and behold, when you're done with it, it ends up being a nice, solid structure. And so really, there's no problem with it. I kind of was dubious of it, but it's going to be good. And it's pretty dang straight. So it's going to look cool. I can't wait to put the rest of the cockpit combing and stuff on there. Stuff will get hidden a bit, but it'll be really cool to look. It'll look pretty realistic. It's pretty neat. So then I decided to take the skin pieces and just start gluing like the rear parts together as a place to start. Because what I was worried about here is how is this all going to go together and be square. And so I just slowly started adding glue and just very carefully putting these with the tabs. So this is the part that's going to butt up against the rear fuselage that's already done or largely done. I'm dubious of this because I never can make butt joints like that look good. I'm probably going to have to play around to make it look good when we try to put it together. It'll have a huge gap and it won't look good. I've seen it done really well, but I've never been able to do that. So I'm going to have to do something, even if I have to resort to putting a little strip of the green brown of the fuselage around that joint when I glue it all together. I might even have to put like some toothpicks or a toothpick in there to make it have a strong connection. Anyway, we'll worry about that when we get to it. Making sure again that everything is nice. Squeeze it down with tweezers. Make sure the tabs are good. There's the tab that's going to help on the bottom part. Can't say enough about tacky glue because man, it works quick enough, but allows you also to work as long as you've test fit and practiced. So a little bit of glue on that part, on that little tongue, and then that's going to give you your bottom piece. And that rolls down, and I'm just trying to make sure it's absolutely on the very, very edge of that. And again, if you do that, it should all be square and true, and so far the model has been. Like I said, the only twist I have in it is my own fault. I'm using some of my bigger, fatter tweezers because there's more surface area on them to sort of squeeze down that tab underneath. And there's the initial part. So then I decided I may as well keep going, and these are just edge glued. The floor fits just underneath and the side, so the side goes down and covers it and glues to the edge so that the floor is flush right underneath the side panel. So I just very carefully put those in like that. And again, this seems like it's not going to do much. Edge gluing like this actually works very well. People do edge gluing all the time. They don't use extra pieces of paper or tabs. It works fine. But it works even better in this case because it'll all come locked together when you actually put that internal cockpit piece in there and that glues down. That'll hold everybody up where it's supposed to go and you won't have any problems at all. So this is just sort of initially getting it sort of tacked in place. And maybe there's other ways to do this, not sure. But this is how I did it. And when I put these down, they're easy to line up because they line up exactly where those holes are, those little rectangular holes that are going to be where your wing spars go in. So I'm not guessing. I can see exactly where they're supposed to go, even if you can't see it quite that well. And then I'm making sure it's flush. And very carefully using my fingertips and my thumbs just to make sure it's nice and straight and smooth and, again, flush as possible. And if you do that, again, you end up with a nice square structure. You can see where the wing is going to ultimately go in place. At least I hope. I haven't really test fit it yet. Should work. And the only piece left is forward of the fuselage. So, and these are going to be holes where cables are going to go through for the controls. So see there's a little piece that goes under there, and the cables go down from underneath the rudder pedals, and then out and around, and then they're going to ultimately go towards the back where the rudders and elevators are. So those square pieces don't say W, which is cut out, but they must be. So I ended up cutting them out because they fit right underneath those two little knobs there, which are underneath of the rudder pedals, which is where the cables connect. So those must have to be cut out. So off camera, I ended up cutting those out. Because I started cutting them out before, and I was nervous, but decided I may as well do it. So in this picture, what I've done is I've just glued all that together. It's nice and solid and straight. Everything's ready now for connecting the internal piece in there. And there are those holes ready to go. So this piece just needs to be slid in. And again, test fitting zillions of times is important. Now on the bottom of those, I have to put cables on because there's no other way to get to them. They have to put cables on and then slide them through those rectangular openings. If you don't do that, you're never going to get things in. Although you could just slide them in and just sort of fake it. But then they're going to ultimately go over like a a collecting area and then down into those other holes. So I cut these fairly long so I have room with them to play with them later. And I'm just zip kicking and super gluing them right to those nubbins of the rotor pedals, little conning connecting rods down there. And then I finally committed to putting glue and smearing glue all over these surfaces, which is how we're going to put this thing in. Again, you don't just do this like Leroy Jenkins it. You practice a lot so that you know it's going to work. There's no question it's going to work at this point. Even so, once you put glue on things, sometimes things don't really fit. But I practiced so many times, I am ready. So the hardest part in this case, again, is now finding those little cables and putting them through the rectangular openings, which I do. It's not real hard. You just got to be careful, and you can't dither too long because you put glue down. So you have to, you can't take forever to do it. But once you get those through, then all the hard stuff is done. And once I get them through and I can feel them out the bottom, I pull them out the bottom. Now I'm good. Now I go ahead and squish this baby down, and it fits right in like a glove. And I push it up in the back and make sure that the front is going to fit right. And now I'm taking time to make sure that my edging, excuse me, goes right up where it's supposed to go. And then I'm squeezing the paper skin so that it's going to hopefully dry nice. And there it is, making sure that all that stuff right along here, and that's nice and solid, and this is lined up nicely. That's going to be for our top decking. And there are my cables coming out, which I will deal with later because there's more stuff I have to do with them. That piece is going to be glued on, and then you'll end up putting, oh yeah, that's the other side, looks good. And then you end up putting that front piece on, which I've pre-rolled. Fits like a charm. I'm deciding if I'm going to put that on first and then the decking on top. I'm not sure. So that's going to be my next test to see what happens. Anyway, it's really coming together nice. I was worried about this part, but I shouldn't have been. Looks pretty fan-freaking-tastic.